On April 9th, 2015, residents of the tiny farming community Fairdale, Illinois, woke up to heavy rains outside and an ominous forecast. Severe thunderstorms were going to persist all day, and then at night there was a chance of a tornado. Meteorologists were telling residents of Fairdale that if you can, you should evacuate. But if you're going to ride out the storm, make sure you have a plan for how to get to a shelter if the storm gets really bad. That morning, some forecasters were saying this tornado could prove to be one of the biggest in Illinois' history. But most of the 152 Fairdale residents had lived here their whole lives, and they'd seen bad storms before, even tornadoes, and they had ridden them out before. How could this one be any different? But unlike previous storms, this one was getting worse and worse by the minute, and by 6 p.m. that night, forecasters were outright pleading with Fairdale residents to evacuate while you still can. But despite these warnings, the vast majority of Fairdale residents stayed put. They were committed to riding the storm out. At 7:15, the tornado finally touched down right outside of Fairdale. It was this massive, almost mile-wide tornado with over 200-mile-an-hour winds, and unlike other tornadoes of that size that typically move at about 30 miles an hour, this one was traveling on land at about 15 miles an hour, meaning it would be sitting over the areas. It was devastating for longer amounts of time, making it even worse than some of the worst predictions that meteorologists had for this tornado. 15 minutes later, at 7:30 p.m., 84-year-old Fairdale resident Clem Schultz and his wife Jerry Schultz, they were at home because they had decided to ride out the storm. He hears his wife yell out from the kitchen to come in here and look at this. So Clem goes into the kitchen and she's pointing out the back window, and he looks out and he sees this massive tornado coming right at them. Clem goes up into the attic, and as he's fishing to get out the lanterns, he hears what sounds like a freight train barreling through town, and he had this little window at the edge of his attic, so he goes over and he looks out, and the tornado had not veered off into the open field. It had continued straight towards his house, and it was ripping off roofs right in front of him. And he figured, I don't have enough time to go down into the basement. I have no time to do anything. So he takes out his phone and he begins recording. Clem's house, along with all the others in that video, collapsed. And initially Clem thought he had died because it went totally quiet and it was totally dark. And he actually said out loud, "Am I dead?" But it was the pain in his back from a crushed vertebrae that told him, no, you survived. And he begins to pull himself out of the rubble, and before long a neighbor is pulling him out. And as soon as he's out of the rubble of his house, he looks around and his whole community is pretty much gone. And as he's standing there kind of bewildered, his neighbor says, "Clem, don't look down." And Clem says, "Why?" And his neighbor says, "Because your wife is under you and she's dead."